welcome from me on behalf of the entire Irish Studies Würzburg team. And of course, a very special welcome to our distinguished speaker this evening, Dr. Maryam Najafi. Before we start, let me briefly explain what is Irish Studies Würzburg, or as we usually abbreviate it, ISWÜ. Well, it is part of a wider European network of Irish studies under the umbrella of the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies, abbreviated EFASIS. And that rather impressive acronym brings together national associations and around 50 academic centres across more than 25 European countries. So while we are very happy to be here in Würzburg this afternoon, we are also part of a much larger and a very lively conversation. And here in Würzburg, we aim to create opportunities for exchange, for collaboration among scholars, PhD researchers, but also students of English, of course, and just as importantly, anyone with an interest in Ireland beyond academia. And our work spans literature, language, history, and culture from the Republic of Ireland and also Northern Ireland, and also, of course, the global Irish diaspora all around the world. And in practice, this means a range of activities, readings, workshops, study days, symposia, conferences, and of course, such as this afternoon, guest lectures. Now, you might ask why Ireland and why here in Würzburg? The answer goes back quite a long way, because since the Irish monks, Cillian, Collinat, and Totnan, arrived in Franconia in the 7th century, Würzburg has liked to think of itself as the Irish city on the continent. And we will have a celebration starting next week, and the so-called Cilliani, lasting for 2 weeks. And one of the treasures of our university library, the Cillian's Gospel, is, I would say, a reminder of these early connections. And it is not only one of our oldest manuscripts, but it's also something of a quiet celebrity, having attracted distinguished Irish visitors over the last years, including the former president, Michael D. Higgins, and the former ambassador, Nicholas O'Brien. And the connection is very much alive today. Organizations such as the German Irish Society, for example, along with numerous cultural initiatives by citizens and local institutions, continue to nurture the ties between Würzburg and the Emerald Isle. So, in a sense, Irish studies here is not just an academic field, it is part of a much longer shared story. And we are delighted to be able to continue that story with events like this lecture. And it is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Maryam Najafi, I hope I pronounce it correctly, from Haliç University in Istanbul in Turkey to you. Her guest lecture is entitled Negotiating Female Identity and Feminist Movements in the 19th and 20th Century Irish and Iranian Society and Literature, a Comparative Perspective. Dr. Najafi is a graduate from the Department of English Language and Literature at Middle East Technical University in Ankara, and currently serves as Assistant Professor of English and American Literature at Haliç University. Her research spans Irish, British, but also American literature and culture, with particular focus on feminist studies, colonial and post-colonial literature, and minority voices and literatures. She completed her PhD with a dissertation on literary encoding of modernist alienation in the language and spaces of James Joyce Ulysses and Sadek Hidayat's The Blind Owl, a comparative study of Irish and Iranian modernist writing. Dr. Najafi had originally planned to join us here in Würzburg this week as an academic visitor within the framework of the Erasmus Plus Staff Mobility for Training program, but unfortunately, visa complications made this impossible at short notice. But all the more delighted we are to have her here with us today, at least virtually, for a talk we have been very much looking forward to. Maryam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you so much. Hello everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm so glad to be here, and I would like to start with, first of all, thanking all the participants here, all the colleagues, students from Haliç University and also Würzburg, and I think some other places. It's really good to have you here. I'm glad to share my talk with you, and I would like to, before I start, I would like to thank Irish Studies at Würzburg University, Maria and Ina, particularly, and their student assistants for sharing this platform with me. I would really appreciate that. And I would like to say that I think it's been about 3 years now that I have been following your programs. Via Instagram, I have been always informed about the programs. The process is really smooth. You go register for the lectures that you like, and the good thing about these lectures is that most of the time, I think always, they are hybrid. I mean, whenever that you have a guest lecturer there, I can join from here as well. So that's a good thing that you share your platform this smoothly, this generously. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to, before I start, I would like to inform you that, okay, first of all, I'll start with a short introduction. Then I'll share with you why I have actually, what is the rationale, the intellectual rationale behind this comparative study. Why Iranian society and literature, why versus Irish literature, Irish society and literature. So I'll explain that very briefly, and then in another brief introduction, I would like to share with you a few points. So some perhaps some of them might seem trivia actually. Some points about why Iran and Ireland in general, about in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of religion, in terms of identity formations, in terms of nationalism. I mean, these are just some general, perhaps some crude points that I'm trying to share with you, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm providing at least a decent introduction. And then I'll move forward to my analysis part. I'll start with, I'm going to share a few literary texts, and then and how I analyze them according to the theme, to the thesis statement that I'm trying to actually make a point about. So first, I will start with the Irish literary text, Yeats, Joyce, and Edna O'Brien. And then from the Iranian Iranian and Persian literature, I would like to share with you for 2 days at least. And by the way, this is a work in progress, and I'm working on this. I'm planning to expand it into something. I mean, perhaps like a seminar, a conference, and then put together something bigger, more detailed, more organized. This is just a work in progress, so please bear with me here. So then, in terms of the Persian literature, Iranian literature, I would like to share with you some poems by Forough Farrokhzad, a 20th century unconventional, very pioneering female poet, and a fiction writer, a novelist, Simin Daneshvar, and Subashun. So this would pretty, I mean, the talks flow will go like this, pretty much like this. And then to conclude, and at the end, I will provide a short comparative analysis of what the Irish and the Persian and the Iranian text actually. And then the floor hopefully will be open for discussion, and I would love to hear your suggestions, your ideas, and your thoughts as well. So I can start like this. By the way, I'll come back to this image at the end of the session. Actually, this is the only AI created image that when I asked AI, to create an image for this title, it gave me first of all the one on the left side, and then I asked it to make it more modern, more updated, and then it gave me the other one on the right side. But that's interesting. As we were discussing it before the session started. AI is pretty much biased, so I just put it here. I don't think that it means anything particular, but it's interesting how media actually has already got its own understanding of this topic, let's say. So as I said, first of all, I would like to explain why this comparison, but just let me start with a short introduction, and then we'll go into more of this. The question of female identity, how it constructed, constrained, and contested remains central to both literary studies and sociopolitical inquiry. In the 19th and 20th century, women in many parts of the world found themselves at the intersections of profound transformations: colonial domination, nationalist movements, modernization projects, and shifting ideological frameworks. This paper offers a comparative analysis of female identity and feminist movements. And by the way, I'm going to focus very shortly and briefly on this feminist movement, because that's a whole another topic actually. At the end of the session, I'll focus on this feminist movement just very briefly. In Ireland and Iran, two societies that, while culturally and historically distinct, share striking parallels in their encounters with colonial pressure, national identity formation, and gender politics. Drawing on literary text and historical developments, this research explores how women are positioned both as symbolic figures of the nation and as active agents negotiating their roles within and against patriarchal structures. By placing Irish and Iranian contexts in dialogue, this paper looks for challenging and revisiting Eurocentric models of feminism and contribute to a more nuanced, comparative, and decolonial understanding of women's experiences. Yes, as you may guess, I think this comparison is unconventional. So I should make clear that the value of the comparison lies not in claiming that Ireland and Iran are the same, but in demonstrating how similar historical forces can produce comparable patterns of women's resistance and identity formation despite vastly different cultural contexts. So instead of, as I said, so what is the rationale behind this comparison? Although Iran and Iran occupy different geopolitical and cultural spaces, both societies have experienced colonial, in the Irish case, or imperial domination and resistance. The centrality of religion is very clear in defining national identity. Nationalist movements that positioned women as symbols of the nation, and also patriarchal social structures, which are reinforced through political and cultural institutions, and literary traditions in which women writers challenge dominant narratives. That some of the examples we will study together momentarily. So this shared historical dynamics makes the comparison analytically meaningful rather than merely just surprising. So my hope is that this paper contributes, its contributions could be moving beyond East-West binaries and simplistic assumptions about feminism, showing that feminist consciousness emerges through locally specific yet structurally comparable experiences, and illustrating literature's role in negotiating female identity during periods of national transformations. I mean, the power of how literature can actually be transformative is one of my personal actually interests, demonstrating that women's agency develops through negotiation, resistance, and reinterpretation rather than through a single universal feminist model. So this one and the next one, these two tables that were, this is comparative table of information, just general information that I am providing here actually intends to provide, just as I said, that general overview of why Iran and Ireland. And by the way, I'm not claiming that this is really unique, or, for example, because when we talk about the imperialist or the colonial background of these two countries, I mean, they can be easily, I can easily replace Ireland with, I don't know, for example, Britain, but or some other countries. But this is just, as I said, this comparison is compelling precisely because it is just unexpected. That's my claim actually. So as you can see, I can't just leave it for you to have a look at this, but in terms of literature, culture, and religion, I would like to share just a few of these points with you. For example, both of these countries, these cultures, these societies have ancient roots and long continuities of civilization, but there are slightly different differences, different points here. Iran's history is dominated by successive Persian empires spanning Eurasia, whereas Ireland's, this is obviously Ireland's history is defined by tribal and then colonial subjugation, and then many independence wars, and the independence, the final independence in 1922. Both literatures reflect a meddling of native religion with later faith. Iran's, for example, Zoroastrian legacy within Islam, Ireland's Celtic beliefs within Christianity. Both names, I mean, this is a trivia actually, but just for the sake of having it here, but that could interest some of us. Both names, Iran and Ire, trace to Indo-European roots, but different stems. Aryan versus fertile land. Both countries' literatures later used multilingual traditions, like, for example, Persian versus Arabic script and Gaelic versus English. Both cultures have grand epics linking myth to national identity. For example, the Shahnameh in the Persian example, the Shahnameh, or the Book of the Kings by Ferdowsi, and the Irish Tane, they combine both history and legends, heroes and gods. They were later valorized as national epics, for example, or poetry. To some point, to some stage, poetry is central in both literatures. Of course, later on, this changes. Each has world-renowned poets blending native and universal themes. Some names like, I don't know, Rumi, Hafiz, at least in Persian writers, Rumi, Hafiz, Yeats, and Shams Haney in the Irish case. Iran's classical canon is overwhelmingly Persian and Islamicate, with little indigenous drama or novel tradition, pre-modern. while Ireland's canon spans Gaelic sagas and later reached drama and novel form in English. Each has a Nobel laureate, and I mean, like many, this is, as I said, these are not unique to either Irish or either Irish or Iranian or Persian literature, actually. One more point here is that both nations have large diasporas. Irish literature famously arises in exile. James Joyce, the great self-exiled name in the field. Themes of homeward yearning and identity are epitomized in songs and poems. Some Iranian examples, Persian literature's examples, are also Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, the memoir that was published in 2000, or Adar Nafisi's Reading Lolita in Tehran. These are some renowned names, and I'm sure that there are many more in both cases. The thing is that the reason for exile here in there are different reasons for this exilic, literatures that are produced. In the case of the Irish literature, many of them are because of the famine, because of the long history of colonization, etc., etc. The Iranian ones, of course, perhaps I'm not doing justice to the 18th 17th, 18th century and 19th centuries exilic figures, exilic literary and intellectuals who actually have moved through from Iran to Turkey, specifically to Istanbul, where we are now. But many of the modern ones are mostly post-revolutionary exilic figures that are actually writing and distributing their works all around the literary platforms. So these are the few things that I wanted to share before I actually go into the actual discussion that I'm going to share with you. I'll start, as I said, I'll start with Ireland and how this discussion is actually represented in the Irish literature, in what are the literary representations there, and also then I'll continue with Irish literary text examples, and then I'll move to the Iranian case. So Ireland's colonialism and the gendered nation section that I'm going to talk about here is just, this is a hypothesis but the text that I have provided here actually proves this, that in 19th century Ireland, British colonial rule deeply influenced social structures and cultural production, obviously. Nationalist discourse frequently feminized the nation, portraying Ireland as a woman, passive, suffering, and in need of protection. One example I have provided by Yeats. This symbolic representation, however, often confined real women to domestic roles, reinforcing patriarchal norms even within liberation movements. One good example here that I haven't actually included in my analysis and my talks is Brian Frill's Dancing at Lunesa. That I love it actually, but I couldn't bring it here. Perhaps in another occasion I'll include that because that's a very rich text actually. Organizations such as the Irish Literary Revival and figures like William Butler Yeats contributed to the construction of a national identity in myth and tradition. Women were often depicted as muses or allegorical figures rather than autonomous individuals. At the same time, women actively participated in nationalist politics, challenging and creating a tension between symbolic representation and lived agency. On the same note, now that we are on it, in the Iranian case, because we're talking about female identities and how female characters are presented and represented in these two cultures and literatures. In Iran, the late 19th and early 20th centuries were marked by the Persian constitutional revolution, a pivotal moment that introduced debates about modernization, law, citizenship. Women played a role. I'm not sure exactly whether they were too much visible or whether they were instrumentalized. Actually, there are debates on that. But anyways, women played a role in these transformations, advocating for education, legal reform, and public transportation. Sorry, public participation, obviously, like many other countries, many other struggles that we have noticed and we have witnessed in history. Actually, the subsequent Pahlavi era intense in early 20th century and the formation of the nation state intensified modernization efforts, including policies related to unveiling women, removing the hijab, unveiling, and women's education. However, these reforms often imposed top-down definitions of modernity, creating tensions between tradition, religion, and state-driven feminism. Iranian women thus navigated a complex terrain in which empowerment was both enabled and constrained by political agendas. So, in both Iranian case and the Irish case, political situation, political decisions, the political structure, and also the patriarchal structures of the society actually were playing an enormous role in this identity formation and how they could identity formation and identity expression, I could call them. Uh, so, a central parallel between Iran and Ireland lies in the dual positioning of women as both symbols of national identity and subjects of social control. This is my primary, actually, hypothesis or thesis statement, let's say. In Ireland, nationalist iconography frequently depicted the nation as a woman, as I actually noticed. So, and figures such as Kathleen Julian, please excuse my mispronunciations, most probably because that's an Irish Gaelic actually name. Kathleen Julian, example. This is a one-act play by Yeats, by the way, exemplifies this trope. These representations elevated women symbolically while limiting their real-world agency. Similarly, in Iran, women's bodies became sites of ideological contestation, particularly in debates over veiling, modesty, decency, and modernity that we'll be talking about momentarily. So, I would like to move on to the literary examples that I would like to share with you and to talk about how this female representations and female identity formations are by the political and patriarchal structures, and how some of them actually turn out to be way more subversive than they actually look like. This one-act play that I'm not sure whether some of you might be familiar with, but this is one of the most famous theatrical embodiments of gendered nationalism in Irish literature, and it was published in 1902. Written by William Butler Yeats and Lady Augusta Gregory. Set during the 1798 Irish Rebellion, the play focuses on the Gillane family in County Mayo, whose son Michael abandons his bride to answer the call of a mysterious poor old woman who represents Ireland. Her transformation is announced in the play's closing lines when the family, specifically Michael and his siblings, they actually save her, and her transformation in the end is this: she had the walk of a queen. That transformation from poor old woman to she had the walk of a queen. This metamorphosis forms from impoverished crone to sovereign queen encodes the nationalist promise that sacrifice and martyrdom will redeem the feminized nation, the motherland. The play was highly influential. Its 1902 Dublin performances are often cited as an inspiration for the young men who later participated in the 1916 Easter Rising. The title role was originally played by the fiery nationalist and revolutionary Multgan, who was a romantic and love interest of Yeats himself, and he was heavily inspired by the character's fierce devotion to Ireland. The figure of Kathleen is also invoked in Yeats' 1894 poem Red Honara's song about Ireland, which captures the tragic but glorious devotion the Irish feel toward her, the mother nation. The symbolic weight placed on this female figure, however, stands in sharp contrast to the real constraints on Irish women's autonomy, a contradiction the literary texts of the period simultaneously produce and expose. So this is Yeats and that idea of gendered nation. Now I would like to share with you a few points about James Joyce's Evelyn, one of my favorite short stories of the Dublin collection. But I think this story of all stories in Dubliners provides Joyce's most direct and devastating portrait of female paralysis in early 20th century Ireland. The story follows a 19-year-old Dublin young girl contemplating whether to flee Ireland with her lover Frank, a sailor who promises her a new life in Buenos Aires, or not. In the end, she cannot board the ship. The story opens by immediately encoding Evelyn's passivity into both her body and her environment. She sat at the window watching the evening invade the avenue. Her head was leaned against the window curtains, and in her nostrils was the odor of dusty cretonne. She was tired. The passive construction, quote, her head was leaned, unquote, rather than she leaned her head, signals from the very first lines that Evelyn is acted upon rather than acting. The domestic space is described through sensory detail that connotes stagnation and decay. Dusty fabric, a yellowing photograph, familiar objects she had dusted, quote, once a week for so many years, unquote. Evelyn's interiority is colonized by obligation, a pattern reinforced by her dying mother's injunction to keep the home together. She had consented to go away, to leave her home. Was that wise? She tried to weigh each side of the question. In her home, anyway, she had shelter and food. She had those whom she had known all her life about her. The weighing of freedom against security reveals how thoroughly Evelyn has internalized the logic of domestic duty. Her longing for escape is real. Escape. She must escape. But it wars with the way of Catholic guilt and familial obligation. Even her father's violence is filtered through ambivalence. Quote, even now, though she was over 19, she sometimes felt herself in danger of her father's violence. She knew it was that had given her palpitations. When they were growing up, he had, the father, never gone for her like he used to go for Harry and Ernest, but because she was a girl. But latterly, he had begun to threaten her. The father, by the way, is an alcoholic, unemployed, and there are this is a short story actually, but too many good points to that introduces about the Irish society of the time at the time. The climactic scene at the North Wall docks when she finally goes to her appointment with Frank is amongst the most discussed passages in modern Irish literature. As the boat prepares to depart, Evelyn is overcome by an involuntary paralysis. The central theme in Dubliner's collection, short story collection, is paralysis, this Irish paralysis that Joyce was trying to convey through his stories. All the seas of the world tumbled about her heart. He was drawing her into them. Is that yes? Into them. He would drown her. She grappled with both hands at the iron railing. Come. No. It was impossible. Her hands clutched the iron in frenzy. Amid the seas, she sent a cry of anguish. Here, freedom has transformed. In Evelyn's imagination, freedom has transformed into a threat of annihilation, destruction. Joyce renders this not as a conscious choice, but as involuntary surrender, a bodily reflex that is produced by years of religious conditioning, familial duty, and economic dependence or poverty. The story's final image is one of the most chilling in Dubliners. She set her white face to him passive, like a helpless animal. Her eyes gave him no sign of love or farewell or recognition. That blankness of her gaze enacts a kind of death in life. Evelyn does not choose to stay. She is simply unable to move, to live. Joyce thus implicates the entire social and religious apparatus of Irish society in the suppression of female identity and female autonomy. As he later wrote in a portrait of the artist as a young man, that the nets of, quote, nationality, language, and religion are thrown at the soul to hold it back. And in Evelyn, those nets hold absolutely. In a portrait of the artist as a young man, by the way, female characters are often filtered through the consciousness of the male protagonist, Stephen Dedalus, and women appear as objects of desire, spiritual figures, or moral threats, reflecting the constraints placed on female identity within both religious and also national and cultural frameworks. However, Joyce's work also very cleverly, I think, subtly critiques these limitations. The absence of fully developed female subjectivity draws attention to the structures that silence women. And I think the final chapter of Ulysses, Molly Bloom's monologue, actually is one of the best places that Joyce provides for his female character to express herself in a flow. That stream of consciousness is brilliant. But of course, that's just a textual, discursive space, as you may know. So from here, I'm going to take us to another example Irish literary text. Some Irish writers, including Edna O'Brien, foreground women's voices and experiences, challenging traditional narratives and exploring themes of sexuality, autonomy, and resistance. Edna O'Brien actually passed just very recently, and one of her well-known works, novels, is The Country Girls, that I'm going to just mention in passing. Edna O'Brien's fiction offers one of the most sustained literary explorations of female identity formation in 20th century Irish literature. Her protagonists struggle to construct autonomous selves while confronting the intersecting forces of colonial history, Catholic morality, and patriarchal authority, rather than presenting identity as a stable or innate factor. O'Brien depicts it as a continuous process of negotiation, resistance, and reinvention. Negotiation, resistance, and reinvention. Edna O'Brien portrays identity as fluid rather than fixed, as mentioned earlier. Her female protagonists seek individuality despite living within a society that defines women primarily as daughters, wives, and mothers. Their journeys often follow a Bildungsroman pattern, but subvert its traditional structures. Like when you read The Country Girls, you'll see that O'Brien's protagonist heroines frequently discover that maturity involves recognizing the impossibility of fitting into restrictive social expectations. Her novels examine identity through several interconnected dimensions: gender identity, national identity, sexual identity, religious identity, and psychological identity. These dimensions constantly intersect, making selfhood fragmented rather than unified. Patriarchy operates at multiple levels. For example, the protagonist, one of the protagonists of The Country Girls, the novel, Kathleen, by the way, her father is also alcoholic, and the father dominates the household through violence and fear. Very, very similar to Evelyn's case, but this character, Kathleen, is more subversive, braver, more, autonomous in a way. Home is not a place of emotional security, but of oppression for her. But on another level, and I think that is the most important characteristic of Edna O'Brien's characters or female representations, is that her most controversial contributions lies in her representation of female desire freely. So, unlike earlier Irish literature, she portrays women as possessing independent sexual subjectivity. However, sexuality rarely leads to liberation because there are structural and cultural and social limitations or restrictions in place that are so strong that you cannot easily get rid of them. So those sexuality, instead of leading to liberation, more often than not, they produce guilt, vulnerability, emotional exploitation, and social condemnations. So female sexuality becomes both an act of resistance and a source of suffering. So for now, that's it for the Irish texts, Irish examples. William Butler Yeats' Kathleen, Julian, Joyce's Evelyn, and Edna O'Brien's Country Girls, or the other Kathleen, actually. Now I would like to share a few Examples from Persian and Iranian literature actually here. So in Iranian literature, women writers have played a crucial role in articulating feminist concerns and reimagining female identity. For example, the poetry of Furugh Farrokhzad, which we will read more about her and by her momentarily, and also the fiction of Simin Daneshvar represent two landmark achievements in this regard, each engaging differently with themes of confinement, desire, agency, and national belonging. Farrokhzad's work, her poetry, explores themes of desire, confinement, and self-expression, very much similar to what Edna O'Brien does actually in her fiction. This is poetry, that's fiction. Thematically, they are very similar, specifically in terms of sexuality and sexual subjectivity, let's say. Farrokhzad explores themes of desire, confinement, and self-expression, often challenging societal norms and expectations. Her poetic voice asserts distinctly female subjectivity, confronting both patriarchal and cultural constraints. Similarly, the novels of Simin Daneshvar, particularly Su ve Shun, the one that we are going to read a few pieces from today, depict women navigating political upheaval and personal struggle. Daneshvar's protagonists often embody resilience, agency, and they reflect broader social transformations. So this is for Farrokhzad. I would like to start with her and her poetry. She was a pioneering, actually, voice, and I think if it wasn't for her untimely, tragic death, perhaps, I mean, she could be world famous. I think in the literature. She was a rebel actually at her own time. By the way, I have used different. I have actually looked at different translations, English translations of Furugh and also Simin Daneshvar's books. So I have a little bit confused myself here, but I'll stick with one of the translations. For example, another birth or rebirth or reborn, that is tavalludi digar, has been translated different times with slightly different translations actually. So I'm going to go with a rebirth and seen and a captive one actually. So Furugh Farrokhzad's Poetics of Transgression. Furugh Farrokhzad was one of the most radical voices in 20th century, as I said. Her work constitutes a sustained assault on the patriarchal and religious structures that confined Iranian women at the time, and her poems scandalized Iranian society precisely because they insisted on speaking female desire and female subjectivity in the first person. Her 1955 debut collection, Captive or Asir, introduced a central tension that would animate all her work: the conflict between artistic freedom and domestic imprisonment. Actually, in the poem Captive, she wrote, I think some of you might be able to read this version, but I don't know if I should read this part or not, but let me try. اگر ای آسمان خواهم که یک روز از این زندان خاموش پر بگیرم، به چشم کودکان گریان چه گویم؟ ز من بگذر که من مرغی اسیرم. Oh sky, آسمان sky, if I want one day to fly from this silent prison, what shall I say to the weeping child's eyes? Forget about me, for I am a captive bird. As the scholar Joanna Scott notes, this poem quote, portray the airlessness of a poorly matched couple and the throttled sound of an unhappy woman's cries, unquote. In her preface, Fru Farrokhzad herself wrote that she expected controversy. Perhaps, quote, she says, perhaps because no woman before me took steps toward breaking the shackles beyond shackles binding women's hands and feet. End of the quote. Her 1958 poem, Sin Gona, brought public scandal and made her a household name across Iran. The poem's opening lines announced an unprecedented assertion of female erotic agency. In Sholeh Walpole's translation that I have brought here, I have seen a rapturous scene in a warm, inflamed embrace. I seen a scene full of pleasure. The poem describes an adulterous encounter with a directness that had no precedent in Persian women's writing. Farrokhzad lost custody of her son for the relationship the poem actually referenced and was publicly condemned. Yet she refused to retract or apologize. The poem's defiant assertion of female pleasure was, as the feminist scholar Farzaneh Milani also argues, both a personal act and a political one at the same time. Her mature collection, A Rebirth, also translated as Another Birth or Reborn, in the Poetry Foundation, I mean that web page, it is also translated or recorded as Reborn. I don't know. And in A Rebirth, her collection represents a broadening of her poetic vision from the personal to the social. The long title poem, A Rebirth or Reborn, opens with an extraordinary assertion of total selfhood. This is a very famous, همه هستی من آیه تاریکی است. And all of them are, if you're interested, if you know Persian or if you're interested, all of them are available in her voice. She actually recited her poems, some of her most famous poems. Very much, she has got so many similarities. I mean, you can find so many similarities in her poetry and Sylvia Plath's poetry, actually. So this poem, All My Being is Dark, is a dark verse that repeats you to the dawn of unfading, flowering and growth. I conjured you in my poem with a sigh and grafted you to water, fire and trees. The poem moves into a mediation on the nature of existence itself, the female self refusing to be reduced to function or symbol. In a room, and here in a room, in the next one, in a room the size of loneliness, my heart's the size of love. It contemplates its simple pretext for happiness, the beauty of the flowers wilting in a vase, the salping you planted in our garden, and the canary's song, the size of a window. The compressed imagery here in this poem, as you can see here, a room size of loneliness, a heart the size of love, and a song the size of a window suggests confinement, but also the interior richness that confinement cannot extinguish. As the Poetry Foundation notes, that's a quote from that website, Farrokhzad, quote, wrote poetry as a kind of arson. It destroys, it annihilates. Her later poem, Green Illusion, Wahm Sabz, was described by Farzaneh Milani, as her, quote, elegant statement of all the sacrifices she has had to make for her art. All day I cried in the mirror, spring has entrusted my window to the green illusion of the trees. My body no longer fit the cocoon of my loneliness, and the stink of my paper crown had contaminated the air of that sunless realm. Farrokhzad's poetry maps a distinctly female interiority onto a landscape of social constraints, refusing to separate the personal from the political and the body from the nation. Suvashun also translated as a Persian requiem and also a novel about modern Iran. Both of them are two different, translations. This holds the distinction of being the first. She actually, and this novel holds the distinction of being the first novel written by an Iranian woman. Set in Shiraz, let me zoom in here actually. Set in Shiraz, okay, I try to share as much of this as possible. Go back. Set in Shiraz during the Allied occupation of Iran in the early 1940s, it is narrated through the consciousness of Zari, a middle-class, happily married woman and a mother who witnesses her idealistic husband Yusuf's fatal resistance to foreign pressure to the British Empire. Reprinted over 20 times and translated into numerous languages, it remains one of the most celebrated and best-selling Persian novels. Where, just very briefly, where Farrokhzad's voice is explosive and transgressive, Daneshvar's is more measured and politically coded, but no less radical in its insistence on rendering female experience as the lens through which national history is seen. Zari begins the novel as a woman conditioned to silence and submission, but grief and loss becomes catalyst for a fundamental transformation for her. The novel's domestic space is presented as simultaneously a refuge and a site of confinement. Daneshvar evokes Zari's interior life through lyrical, nature-inflected prose, like this one. Time stood still, as if it had gone to sleep under the heavy kilt of the sky. And elsewhere in a passage that reveals Zari's supposed desire for agency. She wished the wind would blow, or that, like the wind, she herself would stir up the people and the trees. This longing to be wind, to move, to disturb, to transform, encapsulates Zari's predicament. She sees the injustice around her clearly, but her social position confines her to witnessing. Her helplessness is not personal weakness, but structural. Daneshvar shows Zari constrained by the demands made of women by tradition, marriage, and the occupied political order simultaneously. In one of the novel's pivotal moments, Zari's friend Abul Qasim, and that's a family friend, he articulates the gendered logic of submission that pervades the text. Make fun of me and say that I am not a man, but what can one do but submit and consent? Here, that's a proof that actually Daneshvar believes that this is a structural, actually, confinement and suppression, actually. Zari herself experiences moments of bitter anguish at this logic, asking, oh God, what kind of people are these men? They know it is useless, but to prove their existence, their manhood and courage, and for their children not to later spit on their graves with their own free hands, they dig. Actually, I think at the beginning, she doesn't believe that personal sacrifice actually can do anything good in confrontation with the big, huge imperial power, the British army, who is forcing the farmers, one of which are Zari's husband to just submit their food to the British Army. At this, I don't. Perhaps that's a little bit of a spoiler, but at the end of the novel, actually, the husband Yusuf is killed. Unfortunately, in this conflict, she's they called him a martyr. Actually, it is in the novel's climactic scene that Zari speaking publicly at her husband's funeral that marks the decisive transformation of her identity from private endurer to public actor. Here, they killed my husband unjustly. The least that can be done is to mourn him. Mourning is not forbidden, you know. There are some echoes of Antigone as well, because they actually, when you read the novel, you see that they actually don't let her to to hold the funeral publicly. The state and the foreign forces, they arrive at the funeral site, and they stop the ever-growing population to join the funeral, and then they force her to bury her husband during night. I mean, just a few people and just in silence and all. But as you can see, she, even if it is in a trembling voice, she gives voice to her protest. In the end, the trembling voice is crucial. This is not a heroic proclamation, but a terrified act of courage. Daneshvar refuses to make Zari's agency easy or triumphant. She earns her voice through loss, and in doing so embodies the novel's central argument, that is, the woman's political subjectivity is forged precisely in the spaces that patriarchy and colonialism seek to deny it. At the beginning of the novel, Zari believes that maintaining domestic space is her primary responsibility, but political violence gradually transforms her understanding of agency. After Yusuf's death, she realizes that silence is no longer possible. As Daneshvar suggests, private life cannot remain separate from national oppression. One powerful statement here attributed to Zari is that fear is a habit, as is, I think it was here somewhere, I had put it here, fear is a habit, but so is courage. This encapsulates Daneshvar's feminist vision that courage is not innate but learned through resistance. Near the novel's conclusion, Zari's determination to continue her husband's struggle demonstrates the emergence of female political agency rather than passive victimhood. And this is an interesting closing quotation that I have provided here. This is when it's interesting that in this novel there is an Irish journalist and poet who is accompanying the British Allied forces, and he becomes a family friend with Zari and Yusuf, because Zari has studied. She has a certificate, a diploma of English. So in Shiraz, a rather small, traditional town at the time, she can speak English. So McMahon, he actually develops a friendship with the couple, and then when Yusuf dies, he sends this note to this note of condolence, actually, to the family. This is interesting. Just take a moment to read it for yourself, and then I'll continue in a bit. So I'll come back to this one later on. Now, as some concluding remarks. I would like to share with you a few points and then just a few comparative notes, and then we'll finish up, and then I'll be happy to hear your comments or questions if there are any. While both Ireland and Iran experienced the emergence of feminist movements, their trajectories differ in important ways. As I said, I'm not going to focus on this feminist movements, colonial or post-colonial feminist movements, not at all. I can't do that right now. In Ireland, feminism developed alongside nationalist struggles, often subordinated to the goal of independence. Women's rights were frequently framed as secondary to national liberation, resulting in limited gains in the early 20th century. In Iran, feminist movements were similarly entangled with broader political transformations. And they're actually still, that's the case. However, the relationship between feminism and the state was more complex in Iran's case, particularly during the Pahlavi era, when the state-sponsored reforms coexisted with grassroots activism, actually, and that top-down modernization that was actually not fun. Despite these differences, both contexts reveal the interdependence of gender and national identity. The tension between, I'm trying to share with you as much of this as possible, the tension between tradition and modernity, and most important of all, the resilience of women's resistance. The literary texts examined above are not merely reflective of these dynamics, they are constitutive of them. Farrokhzad's poem circulated as acts of feminist resistance. Daneshvar's novel shaped the consciousness of a generation. Joyce's Evelyn remains a touchstone for understanding the structural silencing of women within nationalism and religion. Literature in both contexts does not simply describe female confinement, it names it, contests it, and imagines its transcendence. And by bringing, and finally, by bringing Iran and Ireland together, I was trying to argue that female identity in both countries emerge as a site of negotiation rather than fixed definition. Women navigate competing demands, tradition and modernity, nationalism, subject individuality, symbolism, and subjectivity. This negotiation is evident in literary expressions of interiority and resistance, participation in political and social movements, even if they are in informal forms, like in Zari's case, and everyday practices of adaptation and transformation. And the comparative study of this comparative study reveals that both of these cultures and literatures both shared patterns and distinct trajectories as well. In both contexts, women are central to national narratives, yet constrained by patriarchal structures. Literature serves as a vital space for articulating these tensions, offering insights into the lived experiences of women across time and culture. As once again, and to conclude, the primary text examined in this paper, Joyce's Evelyn, Farrokhzad's Captive, Scene, Rebirth, and Daneshvar's Suvashun, and also Edna O'Brien's characters, give this comparative argument its human texture and its urgency. They do not merely illustrate historical conditions, they are themselves acts of negotiation, resistance, and reimagining. Evelyn's white face at the docks, Farrokhzad's rapturous scene, Zari's trembling voice at the graveside, these moments do not resolve the contradictions of female identity under colonial patriarchy, but they name those contradictions with a precision that theory alone cannot achieve. And finally, by adopting a comparative and decolonial perspective, this paper underscores the importance of moving beyond some simplistic frameworks and recognizing the plurality of feminist experiences. The stories of Irish and Iranian women, whether in literature, history, or activism, demonstrates the enduring struggle for autonomy, dignity, and self-definition. Thank you very much. And these are a few of my references that I have used. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope I didn't take long.
No, it's fine. Thank you very much, Maryam. Yeah, thank you for this very comprehensive and also enlightening talk, where we all learned a lot. The floor is open for questions now. And yes, can you please, because I don't see any faces, just Miriam's and Mariam's. Can you please show your faces? Yes, hello. And put up your hands if you have questions. You can use your real hands or your artificial hands. And yes, somebody wrote something in the chat, very, very informative. Okay, just saying thank you. Are there any questions? Maybe to break the ice, if it's okay, I would like to start. Yes, and then I'll hand over a very short question. Well, you highlighted, of course, how women in Ireland and Iran negotiated their identities within, I would say, complex social, political, and religious contexts. My question is, what makes this comparison so specific? And there, or wouldn't you find similarities in literatures, maybe also in other countries, other nations, such as Turkey, where you live, or maybe also Germany, where we are situated, in this time, if you compared 19th and 20th century literature?
Actually, yes, as at the beginning of my talk, I was trying to say that, yes, I cannot exactly say that this is a very unique, comparison, but because I'm sure that if I look for some Turkish text, as you said, German text, other, I don't know, for example, some Afghanistan, the text, those women are really, really silenced and oppressed and suppressed right now. But I'm sure that if we look for, we can see the same patterns. We can follow the same patterns of those structural patriarchy reflected in familiar relationships, in sexual orientations, in social and political activism of women. How this patriarchy, I think, shows itself or is embodied in different sides of these people's, these characters' lives. I'm sure that this can be expanded into more, as that's what I understood from you. I'm sure about that. There's no doubt. But this is just from as I was trying to say at the beginning. And then first off, it is a personal passion and interest. I know a little bit of English literature, Irish literature, a little bit of Persian literature. So I put them in. While I was reading them, I think about this character or that character. Now I can bring in, for example, when I'm reading Farouk's poetry or Edna O'Brien's fiction, I can think of, for example, Sylvia Plath or, I don't know, Toni Morrison. So I can put all of this into dialogue. There is no doubt about that.
Okay. Yes, thank you for your answer.
Sure.
You put up your hand, Mert Dennis.
Yeah, I may, Hocam, if nobody has any questions. Can you hear me, by the way? Good evening
yes,
to everyone.
Yes, we can, Hocam.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this brilliant talk and this event, for organizing it. As if we can't have enough of you, Hocam, now we are open up here to ask you questions.
Thank you.
So, Hocam, thanks to you again, I start to read Farhad's Rebirth, and like my question is, when we read Yeats at Haliç University last term, also, right? I happened to get back to it. Like his like vision and also award-bringing, right? Poems like Sailing to Byzantium. They Yeats deliberately preserved those metaphysical elements buried in Irish culture. And in A Vision, his sort of essay and memoir, like he discusses how poetry was performed as some sort of an irrational activity, right, as part of his automatic writing. But he took it even beyond very surrealist, like Andre Breton left. I mean, he was even discussing supernatural beings. Like I read it when I read Yeats, I see it like as some sort of resistance to rational modernism, imposing rationalism, those structural, whatever we call today, right? I mean, philosophical colonization, basically. Do you see anything similar in Iranian literature, like the way to resist that globalization, let's call it today? I mean, we start calling it today the preservation of traditional metaphysical aspects of poetry. What's spiritual there? Yep. Sorry. If I could explain.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks so much. So I think one thing about William Butler Yeats and all the Irish literary revivals, the movements that he actually was one of the leaders, as you know, is that he and thinkers like him, and Joyce was not one of them actually, was to stick to those national identity markers. I mean, national, ancient Irish, Gaelic, very Gaelic. As you said, that the comment is actually right. Yeah. They were resisting against the universal, universal modernism or modernist elements, in order to create that their distinct, their unique, their individual Irish identity. I mean, they wanted to say that, okay, although we have been subjugated, that's my idea, that although we have been subjugated for such a long time, but you know what, we have this distinct identity. We are this very old ancient civilization, culture, poetry, language, everything, whatever. Heroes, we don't need your heroes, we don't need your myth, we don't need this, we don't need that. I think in that part, that I can share this with you all, in that table that I have provided, actually sticking to national identity markers, ancient national identity markers, is a similar point between Iran and, going back to that glorious, valorized ancient civilization, the the pagan one, before Islam and before Christianity. That's something very
Islam
nationalistic.
itself was some sort of modernization, right? After the 16th century, especially, right? It was a
It was
state-sponsored
pioneering.
modernism. So my final comment, Hocam, maybe I would like to hear more from you about it. And I'm the most opportune person here. I mean, for being that close proximity to you. Like Alawites in Turkey, Alawites poetic tradition, and their songs and chants, right? They seem to have that tendency to preserve what is not specifically rational or material. Like, I mean, I think can be speculated to be some sort of resistance in poetry, that they are deliberately not doing away, getting away, rid of their ancient, metaphysical aspects, elements in their art. It's quite interesting. I don't know, Jam, I'd like to hear your thought later, but yeah, thank you. I don't know.
We can discuss it later. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions or maybe also comments? Lorena.
Hi, and thank you so much for your insightful talk. I was wondering, as you were introducing me, at least, to the Iranian literature, I noticed that there's a lot of like ecological themes in these works.
Definitely.
Like the women, they talk about wanting to be like the wind, and the trees come up again and again. And I was wondering if you've ever looked into like an ecofeminist reading of these texts, and if you can see a similar tendency comparing again to the Irish literature in terms of ecofeminism?
Thank you very much for this reminder. Actually, this is right. Specifically, Furugh is very, very. I mean, I mean, I think these people were ecofeminists even way before the concept was introduced into uh, critical thinking arena. Actually, yes, you're right. Many, I mean, research in this regard. I have been thinking of rereading them. That's a good point that I can make it a comparative study, but you know, in terms of 21st century Irish writers, I think I should move beyond, say, Sally Rooney. I mean, there are other names, and I have to make some time and read them, and I have to get familiar with this text actually. But you're right, there are works, and that's a good point. I mean, I would like to have a look at that comparative study. But yeah, the ecological themes are very strong. Thank you, Lorena.
Next project.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I should do that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I have another question on the country girls, because in your talk you highlighted I would call it kind of the deconstruction of the myth of Irish womanhood in the country girls in O'Brien's work. Is it O'Brien or O'Brien? I never know.
Okay, I just went with O'Brien.
Yeah,
I don't
but you know
know.
what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I know
So
that
yeah,
now.
the country girls. And as many students here, and I myself, I come from EFL teaching, and many of our students who join us here also want to become English teachers one day. So from an EFL teaching perspective, what do you think? How can teachers use the novel not only to explore Irish history and gender roles, of course, but also to help students critically reflect on how these cultural myths, I would call it, about women, first, in first step, are created, and the second are sustained, and then maybe challenged across different societies? Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, that's a good point actually. The Country Girls, I think, is a Bill Long's roman, but actually a Bill Long's roman. I mean, Bill Long's romans are mostly about they. I mean, don't quote me on this, but I think that most of the famous Bill Long's romans, other than just Jane Eyre, are focusing on male characters. Perhaps I'm being sexist here, but I have no proof for that. But that's my. But The Country Girls is a Bill Long's roman that actually is very subversive, as you said, deconstructive. These girls, they actually, Kathleen, they explore their desires, their sexualities. So they go beyond, and they break all those structural, so cultural and religious confinements, but again they're not happy, and they're not that happy still. They are trapped in those very well established patriarchal structures that tries to feel them, to make them feel guilty and all. Yeah, but how this could be used in a class, that's a good point actually. I have never used it, but yeah, that's a good point. I'll take note of that. Yeah, but that there's no doubt that they go beyond this.
Mhm. It is definitely a coming of age story, I would say.
Exactly,
Yeah, this is
exactly,
what
exactly.
it is. Mhm. Yeah.
But a subversive and uncanny one, actually, unconventional one.
Mm,
Yeah.
it's true. Any other questions? Yes, Nara Neumann.
Yes, I have also thought about like an EFL context, I guess. And I have also already heard about Kathleen Holian in a seminar I had. So this is more like about a discussion if I would like to speak about her in a full context. So because I wondered, on the one hand, she represents Ireland, and this is quite a big symbolic role, which ultimately empowers women by placing them at the center of an entire country. But on the other hand, it's kind of limiting women because they are turned into symbols rather than individuals. So what would your answer to that controversial, I don't know, view of women be? So um, yeah, I forgot my question about that, but can you think about like how you can discuss these two roles being together?
Actually, the main point I think about the play is that actually is that women are, they're symbolically they are more, I mean, their roles are more transformative. They are freer, I don't know, they are more, they're living a more liberal life, but actually in lived experiences they are not. That's what my argument was about, actually, that specifically considering the nationalist liberal movements, liberating movements in Ireland, women are, and I think that that happens in the Iranian context as well, women are used as instrumentalization of female figures. Yeah, they are activists, they are shown up there as activists, as fiery and rebellious characters, but in real life, they're, I mean, in lived experiences, they are still confined by the political, patriarchal political rules, if you like, authority, if you like. I mean, that's the point. And that's what I was trying to show was that, I mean, we have that example, and then we have, for example, let's say Joyce, and then again we have Edna O'Brien. Edna O'Brien's characters are more closer to the lived experiences there. We actually see them in struggling with those structural restrictions and patriarchal authority, if you like. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you again. We are very much on time. Thank you again, Maryam, for this great talk.
Thank you.
Also for answering all of our questions that we had.
Sure thing.
Yeah, it was a real
Thank
pleasure.
you for listening, everyone. I know that this evening, you mentioned that it's very hot in Germany. It's warm.
It has become slightly cooler.
It was really. But thank you for sharing your time and your platform with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to working on more projects and then sharing them with you.
Yes,
hopefully.
Stay in touch. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and yes, have a good evening, everybody.